This is session 2. The title is The Next Frontier of Digital Drug Discovery. Very topical. As we all know that drug research and development is a long and expensive process, but digital tools are positioned to radically change how treatments are developed. Large data sets, including genomics and real-world data, machine learning, and the opportunity for virtual patient cohorts, show potential to transform the entire R&D journey. We have two very distinguished panelists here who will discuss the pharma's investment in digital tools, where impact is today, and what we can expect the R&D pipeline to look like in the not too distant future. And the question that we need to find the answer for is, how soon will a vaccine be developed for COVID-19? And I'll read out the profile of the two distinguished panelists. We're just going to change the order of the presentation today. We have Amrahi Buang, who is going to present first, followed by Leonard Ariff bin Abdul Shatar. Mr. Amrahi Buang is the current president of MPS, the Malaysian Pharmaceutical Society, the recognized national professional body for pharmacists in Malaysia. He's also a member of the Malaysian Pharmacy Board, Malaysian Poisons Board, a National Patient Safety Board, National Antimicrobial Resistance Committee, and National Tobacco Control Committee, as well as in the technical committee under the national medicine policies. He has served 35 years, 1980 to 2015, at the University Malaya Medical Center, UMMC, as a chief pharmacist and a deputy director professional. He helped UMMC to be the first hospital in the country to be certified nationwide under MS 9001, the quality management system in 2002 till 2015. He also helped UMMC for hospital accreditation under the MSQH, which is the Malaysian Society for Quality in Healthcare, in 2012. And to note that UMMC is the first teaching hospital to be accredited by MSQH in Malaysia. Further, Amrahi is one of the leading subject matter experts on halal pharmaceutical. I think there was a letter that was in the papers yesterday talking about the PPP for the vaccine. And I think two names were mentioned, the Duopharma and Pharma. So we'll just wait to see whether the share price will start moving today. Amrahi is also the only global halal standard for pharmaceutical. He's also involved in the MS 2424, the year 2012. I think there's a 2019 now, right? The 2019 now. And he's also on a technical committee for halal medical devices standard, also the first in the world, and he's a certified halal trainer in this field. But before that, I'll just read out the profile of Leonard. I think we met the last time was the last year, the same similar conference. Leonard started his career in 1988 in the legal profession before joining CCM Group for the first time in 1990. Main responsibility for business development and business management at CCM Chemicals. He joined ICI Paints in Malaysia in 2003 as GM and was subsequently appointed as managing director in 2005 to 2007 before rejoining CCM Group in 2008, as a managing director. And then he led the demerger of CCM from Duopharma, Biotech Berhad, and appointed the group managing director of Duopharma Biotech, a company that's listed on the main board of KLSC. He holds directorship in two listed companies in Korea, Kosdaq, Pangen Biotech, and SCM Life Science. Previously the chair of the School of Business Industry Advisory Board at Monash University, Malaysia, and still remain as a member. And Leonard has held position as the president of MOPI, the Malaysian Organisation of Pharmaceutical Industries, from 2009 to 2014, and currently involved in the CEO facility program attached to UKM, Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia, under purview of the Ministry of Higher Education. Without much further ado, can I just invite Amrahi, can you do a presentation 10 minutes? And similarly, each panelist will have 10 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Yong, for the kind introduction. And also a big thank you to KSI Strategic Institute for Asia Pacific for inviting me for the second time under the Malaysian Healthcare Conference So a big thank you also to the participant to be able to be part of this conference. Yeah. This session is actually to cover the next, the topic regarding the next frontier of digital drug discovery. Of course, when Mr. Yong put in the question, when are we going to get a vaccine or an antiviral for COVID-19? This is $1 million question, right? And this is something that I hope I can share some insight about drug discovery and development as well as R&D. And just to share with you a few what you call things that happen in R&D. Number one is currently it takes about 10 to 15 years to produce a drug. So the question is, can we wait 10 to 15 years to have a vaccine or antiviral for COVID-19? So that's a big question, yeah. And why this is a very long process? Because it involves discovery and development as step one, and then we have the preclinical research, clinical development, and then we have the review from the regulatory as well as post-marketing safety monitoring. So all these are all in place in R&D. So that's why it is very, very expensive. So you will ask me how much will it cost to actually have a drug. Okay, from my research, it took about probably between 2.5 billion US dollar to 3 billion to develop a new drug. So that's why drug is very, very expensive, especially the new ones. Yeah? And to make the matters worse, you can have what you call, say, for even for the vaccine for COVID-19, where we have more than 150 candidates, probably 90% of the candidates will fall, will not be able to go into, to be part of treatment and so on. So this is the challenge. So when we talk about the digital, how you apply digital in drug discovery, so I think the most important thing is that this is the statement, yeah? We'll put artificial intelligence in every step of the R&D change from drug discovery to launch. So it is something that is possible because if we can do that, then we can make the process safer, we can make the process quicker, and we can make it less costly. So that is the purpose of AI, to try to cut down this. Yeah. So if we look into the application of AI in drug R&D, I think the first step is actually to learn about the disease. That is the first step. And this involves vast scientific data. So the challenge is that you have to gather new insights about disease, which will allow for more focused research. In fact, if we look into the COVID-19, actually we try to learn from the SARS, virus, but until now, we're still struggling to even get the vaccine for SARS. Until now. And we know that SARS has left us. Yeah? And this is very important because to learn more about pathology, we must gain a firm understanding about the human genome. Because it's related, disease and genome is related. If not, it will not be effective. Yeah? And it will take the human several years to analyze and interpret this colossal data. AI can perform this more quickly and accurately. That's the keyword. And then you can see that the pathologists spend hours analyzing histology samples or checking for biomarkers, and in the hope of identifying patients who may be more responsive to drug candidates. So, and also if you look into the AI-enabled image analysis, with AI, we can identify these biomarkers almost 30% faster than human pathology. And this is very important because we want to cut down, when we talk about drug discovery, we have to cut down the time. And And so if you look into the use of AI, it is used to streamline efforts in drug discovery. It typically takes years of scientific research and costs millions of dollars to discover potential compound that target diseases. And for my research, machine learning and chemistry automation can drastically shorten this process and cut costs by more than 70% by finding pattern in large data sets. However, let me remind you that AI in drug discovery is not replacing scientists, but allowing them to use their time better and to make more calculated decision. So that covers the drug discovery. What's next? The next is drug development. Drug development, okay? And the most famous word in drug development is RCT, the randomized control trials, which is complex, expensive, and time-consuming. So we have to use AI, okay, and also we're using data analytics to mine through electronic health records. I think you mentioned, Tansi also mentioned, I think the minister also mentioned about the health record is very important, all right? And we know that in Malaysia, we need that, you know, and for the purpose of randomized control trials is something that is required. Because if not, then how do you going to what you call improve the clinical trial processes through faster patient identification and also to get better patient recruitment? If not, how are you going to know whether the drug is going to work or not? All right. The next point is implementing AI and machine learning to capture more value for clinical trial data. So we can use AI as well as machine learning to improve in terms of using the previous data and help inside the research. So all these are something that is important to make sure that the new discovery, the new drug being developed will be useful, you know, because there's a lot of investment being put into here. So this is something that we need to do. So what are the effects or in terms of value and so on and so forth? Number one, implement AI and data analytics in every step of the R&D process is necessary. A more efficient drug discovery and development process utilizing AI not only reduces the time taken to get a viable product to the market, but cut costs. For the patient, a much needed drug, quicker and also cheaper, and faster to go to the market, and sooner lives are saved. So these are all the value creation that we can get from all this, what you call R&D. And we know that the utilization of AI in drug R&D provide opportunities for identifying more novel molecules. Okay, and I think now people are so passionate with COVID-19, we tend to forget about the other diseases. What happened to our NCDs? Are we now forgetting our NCDs? So it's there, it's still there. So it's something that we need to move forward. And the whole idea of AI and R&D in R&D is to provide opportunities for identifying, as mentioned, new novel molecules. And at the same time, of course, in any business, you must have margin, profit margin for all the research that you have done. So that's why the cost of drug is very important. Yeah. Okay. The purpose of AI application is not just to save time and money, but to improve its researches with better data and more accurate analysis. Okay. So what are some of the challenges that we can see from AI? Currently, its adoption is still low, even though it has started. is largely due to lack of trust. Okay, because people are not used, it's still new and so on and so forth. And some of it can, at the early stage, mistake can happen, and people will not trust. So these are things that what I call, because many AI tools are still immature, there will continue to be widespread skepticism of the technology. The other thing is the complexity of AI and its various models make it exceedingly difficult to explain how it works. So these are the second challenge. So making adoption harder. Okay, and even within companies that adopt AI, employees feel threatened that machine will replace them. So for companies to move forward, I think there's also a job creation. So we talk about data analytics, we talk about new profession that we can involve in R&D. So I think as an introduction, I will leave it here. So over to you, Mr. Yong. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amrahi. Very, very good presentation, very insightful. I think you mentioned that R&D takes about 10 to 15 years to produce a drug. AI and data analytics promises a lot of things, but they have a lot of challenges. Slow adoption because of lack of trust. There are many of the AI tools are still immature, and it's very difficult to explain the whole process, how it's been done. And the third challenge would be the machine will be threatening to replace some of the workers, some of the scientists. So I think that's, but you also open up to many questions, and I think when we open up the Q&A, there are a lot of things happening in the world now, particularly China, who claim that they are quite advanced in terms of developing the vaccine. So the next panelist, Leonard, I will just invite you to present for 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yong, my fellow panelists, Amrahi, and the audience here today. Thank you very much to KSI for giving me the privilege of addressing everybody. They say there are two topics that you should never ask somebody's view. One is interior design and the second one is marketing, because everybody believes they're an expert in this area. I would now add a third component, which is vaccines. I'm actually quite shocked at the misinformation that is actually being shared in the market at the moment. And not being a technical person, I will talk a little bit about the industry and also the impact, not just digital, but technology generally, that is impacting the profession. And I'll try to use examples that are as easy to understand, because I like to keep things as simple as possible. So what's the problems with pharmaceutical development today? Amrahi already brought up cost. The cost to develop a new drug is as high, depending on which literature you read, but it could be as high as $3 billion US. Now, why is it so high? Actually, if you can get it right at the preclinical stage, you can probably bring down the cost of development to below 1 billion. So almost 2 billion is wasted due to trial and error. So at the preclinical phases, at the R&D phase, I like to use the current development. If I use an analogy for it, it's what I call a lock and key concept. So you have a lock, which is the disease. So the scientists will come up with different treatment modalities potentially, and they come up with 1,000 keys. You then put each key into the lock and try for luck. And if you're lucky, one of the 1,000 keys will actually open the door, barely. Okay. You then go to the next step where you've now got your candidate and you test it to make sure it works on similar locks. But in that process, you have wasted 999 keys. So that's where the bulk of your 3 billion goes when it comes to drug development. The second issue, quite apart from the cost, is also the concept that one size fits all. I mean, those of you in the medical profession already know that no singular pharmaceutical compound is right for the same disease profile an individual has. So you find that drugs are developed on a one-size-fits-all. That's in order to give it the widest commercial appeal, right? And why is that a problem? The problem with that approach is that today, depending on which literature you read, there's between 20,000 to 30,000 diseases that have been identified globally, okay? And only 1/3 actually has a pharmaceutical addressing that particular disease. So you get a lot of diseases that are not, treatment is not being developed, pharmaceuticals are not developed because it does not make sense commercially. So the drugs you see on the market generally are only drugs that make sense commercially. So that is also another issue. The next issue is actually regulatory. When you have a drug that, say, you got it patented for 20 years, you get your drug validated on your in your factory, and the last thing you want to do is meddle with the formulation. In a lot of cases, you know how you can make the drug better, but in order to do so, in a lot of situations, involves changing the initial formulation. But changing the initial formulation means that you have to revalidate. So I hate to burst the bubble of a lot of people in this room, but in a lot of cases, you're using drugs that were designed and 20 years ago, all right, using specific technology only available 20 years ago. And that's causing the ability to make improved drugs slightly more difficult. And the moment you do an improvement, then as Amrahi said just now, the clinical studies start kicking in. So where does technology play a role in this given the issues that we're seeing? I avoid the word digital because I think, yes, artificial intelligence is one area, but one other area that has grown tremendously over the last 20 years is also analytical capability. Equipments are becoming more intelligent as well. So things that you couldn't test for 20 years ago, you can now test today using machines as opposed to the trial and error concept of using humans. So that has progressed tremendously. Now, where does this have an impact? And this has an impact also on the COVID-19. Any of you who have the misfortune of having a relative who's undergoing, let's say, some form of oncology treatment, cancer drugs, you'll find one of the major targeted therapies available nowadays is a product, classification of product called monoclonal antibodies. Right? Now, monoclonal antibodies were developed. The first one was back in 1973, but they're extremely expensive. Right? Because remember, to develop it will cost you 2 to 3 billion, and then you need to recover that cost over the period of your patent. So monoclonal antibodies, although they're now approaching 25 years in the market, are still very expensive. So governments around the world are trying to figure out a way is how can you bring in biosimilars faster on the market? Okay, these are, if you look at small molecules, you have generics. In large molecules, you have biosimilars. So governments around the world are trying to figure out a way of bringing biosimilars faster into the market in order to bring down its cost. Okay, so what do you have to do? So some regulatory authorities around the world have said that the level of technology available today in terms of analytics allows safety profile of a biosimilar to be established at the point of clinical 1 and clinical 2. Okay, that being the case, the drug has already been proved safe, albeit on a machine. Why don't we allow the ability to launch the product and do your clinical 3 in parallel? Okay, does this ring a bell with anybody? If you remember the Sputnik vaccine from Russia, okay, Russia, China, and Japan are 3 countries in the world that have similar pathways that theoretically, after you establish safety and efficacy in clinical 1 and clinical 2, you can then launch the product and do your clinical 3 in parallel. Okay, so what Russia has proposed is nothing unusual. Okay, the only thing unusual is that clinical 1 and clinical 2 data has not been shared globally. So we only know that at clinical 1, I think there was about 38 patients that were tested, but we haven't seen the results. So this is a means of getting a drug out into the market faster to save costs. And then you do the clinical 3. So different people have different points of view in terms of how technology can technologically competent machines actually replace the benefit of testing in a clinical 3 setting. Now, what is clinical 3 for? Clinical 3 is where you test the drug in the widest population that is statistically significant for the disease prevalence, and also if you do it in country for your population base. Right? So that's why if you look at some of the clinical 3s that are being done around the world, I think Sinovac mentioned that they're doing clinical studies across 19,000 patients. Now, why is this important? This is key because you want to know how the drug interacts over different people. So you might have somebody who's diabetic, you might have a renal patient, you might have another patient who's on high blood pressure medication. So you want to identify what is the impact of your drug into this population base. Now, why is this important? One virus that we've been struggling with for many years is obviously dengue. Now, there is a vaccine that has been developed for dengue. In fact, the Ministry of Health Malaysia partially funded the clinical 3 study of that particular vaccine. So post the clinical 3, dengue has 5 variants, okay? Post-clinical 3, it was found that the vaccine did work on one of the variants. But if you caught any of the 4, it would potentially make the symptoms worse. Okay? Now, this drug was then introduced into Philippines, and it went into the government inoculation program, so to speak. And quite a number of people actually died in Philippines as a result of utilizing, because they basically caught one of the other 4 variants. So that was already picked up in the clinical 3. And that's the reason why Malaysia did not register the drug in Malaysia. Or if it registered it was only for that one variant. But most doctors would not be prepared to take the risk in regards to this. So obviously, one of the benefits in digital technology is the ability to process the huge reams of data that you get from clinical study. So AI, whether it's deep learning, machine learning, has huge potential because in theory, I like to think that with the advent of AI, 2 major things potentially would happen. One is that a lot of diseases that have no current pharmaceuticals can theoretically be developed. Okay? Remember how I said about the lock and key concept? The lock being the disease, then you trial and error 1,000 keys. In the case of AI, you can actually approach drug development the other way around. You understand the disease and then you develop the key. That's the difference between AI and drug discovery as opposed to the trial and error approach that we are currently more used to. Now, there have been instances, the country most advanced in AI technology at the moment in terms of drug discovery is the US, followed by UK, and actually followed by China. China has already indicated that by 2030, they want to be the most advanced nation when it comes to artificial intelligence in all usages, but including drug discovery. So the Chinese pharmaceutical companies have been very active buying equity in AI companies, both in the US and also in UK. The potential benefit on having a drug that is tailor-made, in other words, you can actually complete the R&D cycle much faster, obviously means safer. you're not producing as many variant candidates. So you're not producing 1,000, you might be producing only about 40 candidates, etc., has actually shown to be effective. In the US, there have been cases of companies in America that have managed to actually reduce the time from starting work, identifying a candidate, to being ready for preclinical within 43 days. Generally, it's about 3 years. Okay, but it's still very, very early. The other thing is, obviously, if you can bring down drug development costs from the so-called 3 billion, because you already know nearly 2 billion of US is actually wastage. Now, if you're able to bring down that to something just below 1 billion, then the rationale is the final cost of the final drug will be a lot cheaper. So accessibility will also be improved. So it's actually quite exciting. The fact that you can start developing drugs that are for unmet needs, what we call orphan drugs. You are able to bring out these drugs at a price that will be more affordable and therefore accessible. So there's a lot of plus points with digital drug discovery. There are negatives as well, and this is the part that most people have to realize. After the Human Genome Project, there were a lot of the Human Genome Project completed in 2003, partially, and fully completed in 2005. And since the Human Genome Project came about, there's been huge growth in terms of once we understand the DNA, we can then see, especially those diseases that are hereditary, we can see where it occurs on the DNA strand, etc., etc. But you do have a lot of issues ethically, legally, and also socially in terms of information. How prepared are we to actually share our genomic detail? And it's an area that's still being studied at the moment. You have the processing power, but you still need to respect the individual as an individual. So while there's huge strides happening on the digital side, we have to take cognizance of the fact that as it develops, there are a lot of ethical issues that need to be addressed. Medicines or healthcare should never be just for those who can actually afford it. So there's going to be a lot of ethical discussions as more new products are developed. And as we move into more personalized medicine, the question is, with countries that have a very large proportion of the population covered by public healthcare systems like Malaysia, can we actually afford personalized medicine as it moves forward? So these are questions that there are no easy answers to, but I'll stop there. The gong has gone. So I thank you for your attention, and I'll hand it over to Mr. Yong beyond this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leonard. I think you did highlight this cost about 2 to 3 billion. I think Amrahi also you highlighted cost about 2 to 3 billion US dollar to get a drug to the market. And Leonard, you highlighted 3 points. It's all about finding the right key, and you got so many variants of keys. And the 2 billion will go to finding wasted on the variant of keys. And the second point is that you mentioned that's about 20 to 30,000 diseases, of which only 1/3 has got pharmaceutical solution to this. Then we talk about regulation, how changing the formulation would mean that you have to do the revalidation. So all this actually provide challenges to the market. You also talk about the generics and biosimilars and how clinical 1 and 2 and clinical 3 can be done parallel. So this is due to the analytical capability from better equipment. So it cuts down on the trial and errors and the human. You mentioned about AI, the current diseases, the approach to the diseases by finding the right key faster, so you don't have to spend or waste $2 billion to find the various variant of keys. You also talk about how to reduce the 2 billion wastage. So this is where the AI would have an impact on the whole industry. You did mention about the negative side issues, talking about the legal, the social, and very importantly, the ethical issues. Now, due to the time constraint, I would just like to open the session straight to the floor for Q&A. And if you've got any questions to put to the two panelists, can you direct the question to the panelists? Do the usuals, mention your name, where you're from, and then be short with your questions. Well, I think you, the two panelists has provided a very detailed presentation and all the answers are solved. So it was a bit of tongue-in-cheek and said the share price is going to move for Duopharma. It's just going to be the next play on the pharmacy. Okay, yes.
Hi, I'm Carol from H Care Group. I'll be speaking in the fourth session today, but I thought I'd like to ask the panelists because we have been in H Care for the last many years, 5 years, and we have experienced a lot of challenges when we go to the clients, especially elderly. And most elderly will have medication. I think not just about telling them what to take. I think more importantly is we need to educate them. And especially when they are on their own, managing their medication can be very challenging. And especially during this COVID-19, right? We have so much challenges that I can't even express it. I myself live with my elderly parents. And that's one. They like to go and see the doctor. When they come back home, they are totally lost. They don't know what to do next. That's one, clients. Next, nurses and also carers who take care of the elderly. They also have a lot of challenges in terms of managing the medication and the outcome. We talk a lot about digitalization and I think everything is very good. The whole conversation this morning is excellent. Tan Sri Abu Bakar, I must say you have done a great job for getting us all into this exciting journey. But I think one of the very big missing gap is people. The professionals, healthcare professionals, it's as simple as the family, the relatives, and basically, do they know what to do with or without digital technology? So it's not a direct question to the panelists, but in terms of medication, I can say this is a very important component and we really need to know how can you help us, especially people like us in the industry, right? Providing services to our elderly population. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you've just been polite. The question is actually directed to Amrahi, right, being the president of the Malaysian Pharmaceutical Society.
I think, thanks for the question, yeah. I think right from the very beginning when Tan Sri says that a lot of wastages in terms of drug management and so on, I will share this information that when you talk about medication adherence, it's a well-known fact that 50% don't take the medication. So this is the complexity that we have. So why are patients not taking medication? Why there's an issue with medication adherence? Why there's an issue with medication compliance? So one of the things that I can share with you is the fact that previously before the COVID-19 pandemic, people don't really realize the role of pharmacists in medicine management. But during MCO, then they realize, I think even the one that actually asked the question, and it is a very important aspect when you talk about management of drugs. I think Dr. Raymond also mentioned about, getting the doctors, to be involved in digital and so on. But the big question is still not been answered. Medication compliance. And we also need to empower, the patient to be responsible, when they take their medicines. And I don't see any other professional other than the pharmacist that can do this job. Okay, because whatever it is, okay, we have the knowledge, we have the competency, we have the passion to help, the patient as well as the caregivers to continue treatment, meaning that the role of pharmacist is actually to complement, you have a good diagnosis already, but in terms of treatment, you need, medication adherence and compliance and so on. So I think, and one more point I want to say is the fact that we know that in 2030, Malaysia will go as an aging population. So this is one area that I always say to the pharmacists that this is one area that they should actually profess in it, okay, so that we can help. And my last point is that working with patient is not a one professional job. It is a teamwork. So we need competent doctors, we need competent nurses. Of course, we also need competent pharmacists. So that's my point.
Okay, thank you very much, Amrahi. There's the question that came through. What is your take on the race for vaccine discovery from different countries? Is Malaysia going to participate in phase 3 clinical trials for certain vaccines? What are the criteria for selection for the most suitable vaccine for the rakyat? So maybe I'll put this question to you, Leonard.
Okay. It is a race, definitely. And it's raised a lot of ethical issues, especially I think the US has a specific program, the fast track program. And what they're doing is they're approaching all those companies, except for Chinese companies, that are developing candidate vaccines, and they're doing a barter trade. As I said earlier, the size of a clinical study can be as large as 19 to 30,000. So it's extremely expensive. So what companies tend to do is they spread out their clinical 3 over a number of years based on what they can actually afford to invest in the clinical study. So what the US government and recently the UK government has said is that how much do you need to complete your clinical study, the recruitment, etc., within the shortest possible period? We will give you the money. And if the vaccine is successful, you then return the money by way of the vaccine. So it's a barter, okay? Now, whether it's you deem it to be ethical or otherwise, I think we'll be debating this over the course of the next 24 months. There are approximately 115 candidates. And when I say candidates, I'm talking about candidates that are funded. There are still a lot of candidates out there that are not being funded. In fact, even in Malaysia, I know of at least 2 academics that have developed some form of potential vaccine candidates, but are not being funded, so they can't take it any further. Out of this 115, it looks as if between 15 to 20 are reasonably well advanced. When I say reasonably well advanced, they've completed clinical 2, and they're now looking at recruitment for clinical 3. Out of that 15 or so, there's about 7 who are slightly more advanced. Now, out of the 7, you have a few, 2 of them, that are using novel technology. Okay, there's never been an mRNA vaccine that has been commercialized as yet. People have been talking about it for many, many years. We haven't reached it yet. Then the other 5 are actually inert vaccines from China, from UK. It will, I think you will probably find, since most of them are starting clinical 3, I don't know the value of having a mid-study report in the first 3 months, because it will take them longer than that to even recruit the patient cohort. Can you imagine having to recruit 19,000? So it would take at least, in my guess, 3 to 6 months before you can actually have a preliminary report on a clinical study that is statistically significant. Right? Now, will Malaysia ever be a candidate country? The answer is no. We don't have the patience, thank God. Okay, so you're going to find Brazil, US, India and Indonesia will be likely countries for any clinical study moving forward, because they have the misfortune of having the largest prevalence. Now, why a clinical 3 is key? We've seen so many mutations. So when they do the study, they actually will have to determine what mutation they are dealing with within the cohort of their patients. So you might find that they will find a vaccine, or you might need a combination vaccine. You may need 1 dose, you may need 2 doses, you may need 3 doses. We won't know. We won't know until we see the clinical 3 data. And as I said, it's very, very difficult for the size of a clinical 3 to be statistically significant and for you to conclude anything in the near term. So can we take the approach of Russia on the basis that the product is safe? You can, but you have to realize that the risk levels increase, because we have to be cautious that there's already a movement against vaccines, logically or otherwise. And if you introduce a vaccine that doesn't work or creates more problems, you're feeding into the anti-vaxxers as well. So we have to be
Leonard,
cautious about our approach.
Okay, can I bring this session to a close? I think we are running over to the next session. There's supposed to be a question from you, but I think we have run out of time. So you can approach the panelists offline. Can I ask all of you to thank the panelists in the usual manner?